Okay, well, welcome to a new series with my buddy Dave Ward. We'd kind of thrown around the idea for this for a while working on the jQuery series. We talked about that there are lots of specific questions we get. Like you'd see them come across on Twitter, or Dave gets questions all the time on his blog. And we thought it'd be really cool to have a series called Ask the Expert, Dave Ward edition. So how this series is going to work is that I've set up a site at vote.tekpub.com. And what you can do is you can submit questions. You can vote up other questions you see, and whichever ones are highly voted and we think will make a good series. It won't always be the highest voted one if we don't think that one would make a good episode. We'll show how to we'll answer that question and show how to do it. We're not really looking for specific questions like what JavaScript function do I use for this. We're looking for more of those complicated questions that are more guidance, like how would I do this or how would I do that. So to get started, we took a question that Dave gets all the time, which is how do I use Ajax to display a dynamic image?
Yeah, I do. It's a common question when you go from generating images on the server side, maybe pulling something from a database, or charting, or generating a custom image, or maybe doing often you'll do a composite with a watermark over images before you send them out. There's all sorts of things that you might do on the server side where you're creating an image and sending it down to the client, and the image doesn't exist on disk. So when you move to doing that in an Ajax approach to the rest of your page, the question often comes up: how do I send that image back in an Ajax response? That's sort of the natural thing to try, but you can't do that very easily, and so the question comes up very often. How would I do that?
Right. So yeah. So you're saying that most people would look at it and say, how do I send this binary back in like a JSON request or something or a JSON response or something like that, right? I mean, that's kind of, makes sense. Like you have an image, you want to send it back to the client. But that's really kind of fraught with disaster trying to do that, right?
Yeah, while it is technically possible to base 64 encode binary data and send it back as text, there's really no widely supported way to then take that and inject it into the page in line like that. And it's a lot more complicated than it actually ends up having to be. There's a much simpler way to do it. It just requires that you change your approach a little bit. So it's maybe what you sort of you start with very simple requests and responses where JSON works good, and then maybe you move out to custom objects and things like that. And the sort of the path that takes you down of using JSON objects for everything may sort of lead you astray when it comes to binary stuff.
Okay. So what we've done is we've worked up a little sample app here using web forms, which is my favorite web technology. I have to edit the sarcasm out later.
I asked him to use Ruby on Rails or ASP.NET MVC, and he insisted on web forms.
I said we got to use web forms. Okay, so I made this really simple little app. What we're doing is we type in a customer ID, we submit it, which does a post back, and then delivers this beautiful chart about bananas, apples, and oranges. If we look at the client or the code, here we have just our text box and our button. And then we have the nice built-in chart controls that come with ASP.NET. And then when you look at our server-side click event, we're calling our data repository to get our data for our customer. This is usually a bad idea. Don't just convert that and assume it'll work, but doing it anyway. And then we're just binding up the chart using the data. So
and the exact example with the chart, it's good for demonstration purposes, but keep in mind, if you're watching this, this will work with anything where you're generating an image on the server side. This is just a simple example,
right? Because I mean, like you said, there's tons of reasons to do that. Like if you're storing the data if you're storing images in the database, or even if you just want to force authentication on the images. Like if you have a site where you're doing like an album site, the images, you don't want to make them public because anybody could look at them. You want to put them behind something. So this would be a good case for that too, right?
Yeah, definitely, because you can set a deny users all in your web.config there, and no one can ever hit that image, but the handler still does have access to it.
Right, and the handler can do the authentication and stuff.
Right.
Okay, so the chart example is really just our generic example, but it is a valid example. I'm sure people are trying to do this.
Yeah, it's a specific question that I got within the last week, actually.
Okay, so what do you want to do first? Do you want to wire up a little Ajax, or kind of what's the approach we're going to take? How are we going to solve this problem?
Well, what we're going to do different here is instead of trying to do anything that involves sending the image data back in a JSON response or any sort of traditional AJAX at all, what we want to do is we want to create an endpoint of some sort. Some people will use different things. I prefer an ASHX HTTP handler. That's a mouthful of abbreviation, where it will send back an image file. You move the generation to there, and then you send the parameters into it instead of setting them in the code behind. And then you can just assign that to an image.
Okay.
So I think probably we want to start with that because there's not much AJAX to do until we have the endpoint to request.
Okay. So yeah, so we'll just go add. So we add a new item. So generic handler, call it.
Mm-hmm. And make sure you get the generic handler because that gives you the file endpoint. That makes it a lot easier.
Okay. Yeah, because the ASP.NET handler, you have to register in the web config and stuff like that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's take a second to explain what handlers are, because I know that some people have been using them for years, but it's still kind of unknown to a lot of people. What's a handler? What makes it different from other things?
Well, to me, I think the handlers are really like a hidden gem of ASP.NET. All it is it's just a much lower level. It's almost as low level as you can get. Way to handle a request and send back a response of any type. You'll see this sort of thing done in an ASPX page instead, and that's a bad way to do it because it adds a lot of extra overhead because you still have to run the page class through its life cycle and all that stuff, for no reason whatsoever. This lets you get a few steps closer to the metal than the ASPX page is, and it's just as easy to work with anyway. So why wouldn't you use it?
Okay, so basically it's like we're like getting that request as early as possible. It's kind of like the request. The request is coming into IIS, it's getting passed off to ASP.NET, and then it's
still going through the modules. It's going through the HTTP modules before it gets here. Like authentication and things like that.
Right.
But it does preempt a lot of the higher stuff.
But it's not doing view state and page init and all that stuff. Okay.
And so what you get is you get a HTTP context that has the request, just like you would normally in the page request. You get all the stuff like the query string and all of that. And in the handler, you get the same thing. And then you just on that same context, you can add things to the response. And then when it's done, whatever you have put in the response will go back to the client.
Okay.
So it's really straightforward. There's not much to it.
So if we want to, let's say we'll just pass in customer ID through query string.
Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. So then what I wrote here is we're just pulling it right off of that request object, just like you would in code behind, right?
Yeah. The only difference is in code behind you're doing page.request, and here we're doing context.
Right. And then we're going to use the same little fake data repository.
Yeah, from this point for the next few lines, generating the chart, it's exactly the same as when we were pulling in the text box value, except we're just getting it off the query string now.
Okay, and then for our chart, instead of having something on a designer and stuff like that, we're just actually going to create it pragmatically back here.
Mm-hmm.
So this is kind of specific code to creating a chart, which is nice if you actually want to create a chart. But this is where you would most likely be doing whatever else you're doing if you're pulling something from the database, whatever it is, right?
Right. Yeah. So if you were pulling an image out of the database that's just a blob, you can turn right back around and send it back out the way we're about to. We'll show how to do that. And same thing with if you have files on the file system, you can read them in and send them right back out. So you can do just about anything here. If you have some way, in code behind code that you're generating an image now, you can move it to this and it'll still work.
Yeah, my original idea, I wanted to take the little Tekpub camera icon and make it so people could submit any image, and we'd spam it with the Tekpub icon. But the chart seemed a little bit more practical usage.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so we got our chart created. We've data binded it up with our data. Now we're actually to the point where we have to write this out to the response, right?
Mm-hmm. And this is going to vary a little bit depending on your particular scenario too, because we're going to use something of the chart that saves the image out.
So we're going to say save image, and what save image does is that takes that image and it writes it out to any stream we give it, right?
Yeah, probably in the past you used that to save it to a file.
Right.
And you can do that here too. We could save it out to a file name if we wanted to, but that's awfully wasteful. We can just send it directly back.
Right, because I mean, if you save it to a file, then the only reason to do that would be if you wanted to cache it, like if you only wanted to generate it once. But chances are, like, you're gonna have so much overhead from saving it and checking to see if it's there, and then pulling it in and sending it out and stuff like that. It's probably just better to generate it and send it right out.
Yeah, and more often than not, you go out of your way not to cache it because you want to make sure that if someone changes a value somewhere, and it comes back and regenerates the chart, you want to make sure it's correct, or if the data is updating in real time or something like that.
Right. So what this is going to do is this is going to pass out all that data. So let's go ahead and look and see what that looks like. We'll show. We can just call this directly, right? Just like a web page.
Mm-hmm.